It would be one thing if EdTech was steroids, right? If we had all of this negative stuff, but look how good performance was. Kids' privacy is in jeopardy. Their necks and heads might hurt. They might not have the social skills they used to, but gosh, look at their academic performance. We don't even have that. I think the first thing to understand is don't take this fight on yourself. Start building community, asking questions in your community. These are my concerns. This is how it's affecting my family. How do you feel about this? I would be surprised if you didn't start finding like-minded people to work with. And then to take these concerns to your school district together. There's so much evidence and information out there now that this is just bad for kids.
Hello to all our moms, dads, and grands, and welcome back to M4L Academy. Today's conversation is for all of us, for every parent who has looked at the tech in their kids' classroom and thought, wait a minute, who exactly is this helping? Because once you start pulling on that thread, turns out the answer is usually not the kids, definitely not the families. Andy Liddell from the EdTech Law Center is back with us today to walk through what's really happening behind the screens. From data breaches like the recent one at Canvas, to the mountain of student information schools collect, to the huge gap between what tech companies promised and what families are actually living with. And let's be honest, the pitch was always shiny. More access, more personalization, more efficiency, more future-ready kids. But somehow the product also came with more surveillance, more risk, more distraction, and more reasons for parents to become amateur cybersecurity analysts at home. So if you ever felt like the education world sold you a solution and quietly handed you a problem, this conversation is going to hit home. Welcome back to class. First of all, thank you so much for coming back to join us again for another conversation. I was reviewing our previous conversation, and I have to say, I think it was truly one of my favorite, probably because I'm a data nerd, so like there's that part, but I didn't know so much of this stuff, and I really appreciate you explaining this in ways that people can so easily understand.
Well, thanks. No, it was really fun to talk to you last fall, and I'm glad to be back. So thanks, Missy.
You've had so much exciting things happening, really. We've got the cases that happened against social media, which we had, and the EdTech. Well, no, was it against any EdTech companies that were resolved yet? Because I know you had some open. Did those get finished?
None of our cases have been resolved yet. No.
Okay. All right. So but you were very aware of, obviously, and deeply, well, I think deeply concerned about the social media, the big tech cases that were happening there, which I think is a good start. That's fantastic. But we have since had other things happen. And in particular, today, we want to dive a little bit into the recent data breach that happened with Canvas, which is, I mean, my daughter, one of my children used or had Canvas in her school. So that was made me wonder, great, what's out there of my kids? And if that was impacted as well. So could you start by telling us a little bit about, or more about it? What should parents know? What happened and why should they be concerned?
I'd be happy to. So first things first. So my law firm actually sued Instructure, Canvas's parent company, well before this breach happened. And you may be thinking, deja vu, did we talk about this last time? Well, we did, but with a different EdTech company. And so we sued PowerSchool, warning that they were a soft target for hacking, and then they were hacked. We did the same thing with Instructure, and then they were hacked. And so everything that I'm going to tell you is only based on public reports, nothing from the litigation or that I've learned privately. And so that's that. I will also share, as free to put in the show notes, my sources for this. There's a group called stateofsurveillance.org, and they rounded up a lot of the great reporting on this breach. And so your viewers may want to check that out for themselves to read it. But the long story short is that for those who don't know, Instructure is the parent company of this platform called Canvas. Canvas essentially is kind of like an operating system for colleges and high school and school districts, where lessons are posted, tests are hosted, learning materials are accessed. There's a back end piece of it in terms of information management about the members of that school community. It's this massive company. It's worth several $1 billion. They've been around for quite a while. And they are present in 8,800 different colleges and school districts, we learn. So they have all kinds of sensitive information. If you think about everything that happens at school, they had it. They had it, hosted on their servers. And at the very end of April and early part of May, they were breached by this hacker collective called Shiny Hunters, apparently. And they are, a well-known group of hackers that engages in what's called ransomware. So they will hack in, they will take a bunch of sensitive information, and then they will say, look, we're going to leak this to the public unless you pay us a big ransom. And so this is a pretty tried and true method of of cybercrime, and that's what they did here with Canvas. So it happened in late April, early May. It was announced the first week of May, and then Instructure, the parent company, was given until May 12th to pay the ransom. In the intervening days after the breach was announced, hundreds of school district and college websites were defaced by shiny hunters. They injected some stuff and had their own kind of little ransom note showing up when you went to log into Canvas. You saw a note from these hackers. I've heard reports that many school districts and colleges weren't able to complete finals on time because they couldn't access course materials. And so you think about, if you're trying to study for finals and someone just takes and throws away all your notes and all your textbooks, how hard that would be. That's sort of the equivalent. Or if you can't actually sit down and take the test because it's hosted on Canvas, then you're just locked out. And so people were locked out of school for a little while, as I understand it. But then before the deadline, it was reported that Instructure did pay the ransom. There is no reporting on how much that figure was, or what assurances were made in terms of whether the information was actually deleted. We were talking about taking the word of a group of cyber criminals that they deleted the information. So I would maybe not take that fully credibly, but that was the bargain.
It's really funny to me. Not funny. It's only funny in like a slightly ironic way anytime I hear about these things, because all of my background is in technology, as we've talked about, and I actually led my degrees. I have a concentration in cybersecurity and have been to several events where presented by the FBI, actually talking about the dark web and ransomware. And ransom is any sort of like this type of event, it's always ignored. It's never considered that much of a concern until it happens to your company. And that's what it's weird. It's funny. It's across every industry. But when we're living in this age of information where everything is online, we need to see this taken more seriously. So anyway, that's just a personal caveat. You mentioned that the amount of data, that all of this data is leaked out or is now stolen. So put a little bit more teeth to that. Help our parents understand, why should they be concerned about this data? I know we talked about this a little bit before, but I don't know that people necessarily realize just how much data is being collected on their children.
Right. So you think about all of the stuff that, used to come home in the backpack and get thrown away, right? So you've got all of the kids' assignments, right? And it's not just the assignments that they do, but it's how they do them, how quickly they do them, whether they're off task, whether they're at grade level, above grade level, below grade level. There's all this interaction data that's collected. You obviously have communications back and forth between students and teachers. You have teachers' notes on students. You may have health records from the nurse's office. You may have stuff about your family situation, where there may be things the school district needs to know about you or your ex-partner, or just different circumstances that might reveal very sensitive things about other people in the family or about the child. This child has been a victim of a sex crime. Well, that's something the school needs to know, but it's not something the whole world needs to know, right? And so all of this stuff is potentially affected because it's all part of this one big system. And clearly it wasn't set up in such a way to prevent it from being leaked. And so we have all this information in addition to contact information, demographic information, family information. And think about, when you're ever trying to log into your bank account and the things that you're asked for, right? What's the name of your favorite third grade teacher? What street did you live on in third grade, right? All of these like things that are, what's your mother's maiden name? All these things that are meant to be known only to you, not easily accessible just to the general public, not searchable. Well, those things are very easily found in these types of databases, right? And so this information, certainly when it affects young people, the primary use case for this hacked information is to open bank accounts in their name, take out credit in their name, and essentially do it before it gets caught. Because if you're 9 years old, you don't have a credit report, or you're not out there spending money. And so what often happens is there's breaches, and then credit is taken out somebody's name. They don't find out until it's time to go to college or apply for a car loan or apply for a home loan or whatever it is, and then they come back to destroyed credit. And so that's one problem with this going forward. But now that you have all this information about people, and we don't know how far back it's gone, this would allow you to potentially breach current systems, like we talked about with the bank, right? And so if I was a younger person, but if I've been to college in the past 15 years or whatever, well, Canvas would have all this information about me, and it's potentially still there.
We recently also heard, I think it was maybe a month or so ago, that was it Anthropic that said there's this newest release was so bad, it was so dangerous or so advanced, I guess, that it said it put kind of absolutely everybody at risk in the world, because it was, if hackers got a hold of it, it would be able to be godlike, in is the way it kind of sounded like to me. So with these kind of things, I mean, I feel like it's pretty safe to say hackers are going to be going after that type of technology. And we are seeing just an absolutely astronomical rise in the use of AI everywhere, and people putting in personal information. Oh my goodness. Speaking of personal information, when they're talking to these chatbots that aren't necessarily keeping those conversations private, then I mean, I could even see there being a tie between the data that person is actually saying and sharing with the chatbot versus and what was hacked through systems like this Canvas breach. Ooh, that's
Yeah.
scary. So
There's a lot to worry about.
yeah, well, so I feel like that was such a positive statement. I didn't think of that until just now, so that's kind of disturbing. So, what should parents do if their school was impacted?
So yes, there's a lot you can do, and so your school should have let you know by now, or will let you know soon via an email that you were affected. And realistically, what they'll say is this happened, and then on this date, the ransom was paid, and we understand that the information was deleted, and and that's that. I would say that parents should be skeptical and probably shouldn't take the Hacker Collective's word that they actually deleted all this information like they said they did. And so if you hadn't heard from your school, reach out, ask them, what assurances, what evidence have you gotten from Canvas and Structure that this information is no longer going to be out there or subject to being disclosed. Something that everybody should do is put credit freezes on your kids and yourself. And so the big three credit reporting agencies all do credit freezes, and it's really not that much of a pain in the neck to do. It's a little bit, but also like how often are you buying a car? Right. And so you basically, you put this freeze on, and then essentially have to go in and lift it so somebody can run a credit report in your name. And so credit freezes help, credit monitoring helps. I'm sure that's going to come out after the inevitable class action lawsuits. And then that's also an option. And so, right now, I checked just before we signed on today, and there are about 40 federal lawsuits against Instructure right now arising from this data breach, which is not at all surprising. In the PowerSchool breach, there wound up being over 100 between individuals and school districts. And so, in a similar vein here, if you're concerned about this and want to help hold the company to account, you can reach out to us via our website at edtech.law, and we can discuss what a data breach website against Instructure might look like. We've got partners that we work with on cases like that. And so those are some of the things that the parents can do. But the reality is there's not much you can do. And that's a huge problem, feeling so disempowered like that.
I agree. And so you can't necessarily do that much about the past. And I hate to say it, but it kind of is what it is. But hopefully it's a lesson that was learned. And if Hopefully, people will take that advice before their data is breached in whatever way. But this touches on or leads us to the idea of what sort of protections are actually out there for students' data, for child's data, especially as technology is so utilized in schools so strongly. Although we are seeing a great and encouraging pushback against the one-on-one devices. I find, since our last conversation, I find that incredibly encouraging myself. So let's take a minute and shift over to talk about some of the laws that are out there and what exists right now to actually protect student and child data in technology and online.
So there are federal regulations that do apply. The challenge is those regulations cannot be enforced by private lawyers like me. They can be enforced only by certain federal agencies or state attorneys general. There also is, the common law where you could just sue over stuff, and that's much more robust. But let's focus on the two federal laws that are meant to provide kids more protection. And we touched on this last time, so I won't go into tremendous detail. But essentially, we've got COPPA, which is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act of 1998, and that gives children under 13 and their parents additional rights for information that's collected about them online and on the internet. And COPPA does apply at school. But COPPA may be enforced only by the Federal Trade Commission and then by state attorneys general. There is no private right of action under COPPA itself. Then there's FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and that's from 1974. And so obviously very old law. and FERPA regulates schools. So FERPA was passed in this time of what they call kind of the rights revolution. But basically after all of the corruption of the Nixon years and previously, during the anti-Vietnam protests, there was a lot of crackdown in a bipartisan fashion where the government would seek information about dissidents through their school. And so they would go and get school records. There was a big public outcry. Parents were very upset by this, where basically everybody had access to my kids' records except for me. So the FBI could come in there and take it. Johns Hopkins University could come in there and take it. But if I asked for it, if my child asked for it, they couldn't get this information. And so Senator Christopher Buckley, who was senator from Connecticut, he championed this bill, FERPA, to, in his own words, if you read the legislative history, to basically enshrine in law the expectation of privacy that families have under the 14th Amendment. And so it's parents' rights over their children and to kind of protect their private life. Also, children's and students' private rights to privacy themselves, that they're all enshrined in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which is where parents' rights come from as well. And so we have this great law. The challenge is the way that it is enforced means it's never enforced because of federalism and funding. The way that the federal government even has jurisdiction over schools is only through funding. It's kind of like state highway funds, right? Where the federal government can't set the minimum drinking age, but they can say, if you put the minimum drinking age at anything lower than 21, you're not getting highway funds. And so in a similar way, the only lever that they have is federal funding for schools. And so if you're a school that receives federal funding, FERPA applies to you. And if your school violates FERPA, the funding is pulled. Well, obviously, that is a huge, huge hammer. And nobody wants to be the one defunding public schools in that manner. And so what we have is just basically 50 years of unenforcement or under-enforcement of FERPA in this respect. And because it's the federal education department that is responsible for doing this, well, they have a whole other host of responsibilities as well. And so, in addition to the remedy being very unappetizing and unappealing, you also have just generally, resource allocations and priorities. And so essentially what we have is what's meant to be a very, very strong law that says, if you're going to disclose anything about me as a student to anybody else, if I'm a minor, you need my parents' permission. And if I'm an adult, you need my permission. And that's essentially been just swept entirely away. And so, it's unfortunate that that's the state of things, but that's where the common law comes in, where you do have these expectations of privacy that are grounded in the Constitution that are grounded in your state constitutions or state privacy laws, or just general the way that we've always done things. That's the common law, that says, these things are offensive, these things are invasive, and it doesn't matter that it's happening at school. I can still sue these companies for these violations.
So is there anything else? Are there any other? Sorry, I'm going to ask this question, and I don't anticipate that you're going to know every single state detail, but below the federal level, and not necessarily in just regular common law, is there state legislation that could add a second layer of protection then to students and children in schools?
There is, and this year has been just a real groundswell of legislation that's been passed. So I've not been able to keep on top of every single bill, but
What do you mean? How can you not follow every bill in all 50 states?
I know. As much as I'd like to, and I frankly feel like I haven't done my homework when I'm asked this question, but it is a lot to keep up with, and also keep up with my day job. But I do know that efforts have been made across the country in states like Utah, in states like Vermont, and states like Maine, where we're moving in a better direction. I don't know, for example, if there's going to be a private right of action anywhere. I would suspect probably less likely that there is, but states are putting up a stronger kind of regulatory framework around EdTech, being able to approach it in a more systematic and skeptical and considered way, the same way we do with teacher certification and curriculum adoption, where there is this process. It is robust. It is slow. It's not meant to be fast. It's meant to be deliberate, and it's meant to do as good of a job gatekeeping as we can, right? And so, if you just think about the structures that are in place to make sure that the teachers that are teaching our children are qualified to do so, are safe people to have with children. They're not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than just opening the door to anybody who really, really, really wants to spend time in a room with kids, right? In a similar instance with curriculum, this process is meant to be public and informed by expertise, reflective of the value of the community, and then give schools ultimately and districts a menu of approved options to choose from. But the idea is that there's a baseline level of quality and accuracy to this information. And then you just have these Chromebooks come into the classroom, and it's open to the whole internet, right? And so I'm pleased to see that states are taking a more skeptical eye toward a lot of this and applying that same mentality toward EdTech as they do the rest of education.
Yeah, I agree. It is, every time I see this pushback and well, kind of what we talked about, right, has EdTech delivered on its promise of incredible outcomes? And really hasn't. And so actually seeing that people pay attention to it is great. You mentioned private right of action. Can you explain what that is?
Right. And so that's annoying lawyer talk for I can sue you if I don't work for the government, basically. And so essentially, a lot of these laws are regulatory in nature and can only be enforced by government agencies. And so COPPA is a great example. There is no private right of action in COPPA. The enforcing authorities there are the Federal Trade Commission from a regulatory standpoint, and then you have state attorneys general. They can sue under COPPA, and that's a statutory thing. Congress could amend COPPA tomorrow and also and say this is something that anybody can bring a COPPA suit. Industry lobbies hard against those sorts of things because they don't want they don't want private litigation, right? They would much prefer to rely on under-resourced attorneys general that they can redirect in other places, Federal Trade Commission that they can pressure through other means not to be as robust as they otherwise could. It's just a way of dodging accountability, frankly. So I think it's really important for all of these consumer protection laws to have a private right of action. But of course, I would say that I'm a plaintiff's lawyer. But really, I mean, not in a very non-facetious way. I think that plaintiff's lawyers really do get a bad rap for being greedy and holding up these companies. Well, I came to this from a lifetime at a big law firm, and it's like I've been on all sides of this. I've defended big companies. I've sued other big companies on behalf of big companies. And I think, there is actually another book, The Conservative Case for Class Actions, is really a great one to read here for those of your viewership who might be skeptical of what I'm saying, in that, it really is, I think, a market way of enforcement, right? Because attorneys are really motivated to only bring good cases. They take on tremendous risk to bring them. The outcome is not guaranteed. So there is this filtering effect. And the plaintiff's bar is not subject to the same political pressures as enforcement, as government enforcement is, right? And so we've seen the education department has been dramatically reduced in size, and even for previous to that, they still, I don't think, we're doing an adequate job of paying attention to these issues and enforcing. Similarly, with the Federal Trade Commission, I think they've done good work here and there, but again, the resources and the political willpower are often missing. Whereas if you just empower private attorneys to bring good lawsuits and hold them to a high standard, which we are held to a very high standard, we can't just make stuff up and sue companies for no reason. Then it would allow, I think, a lot more accountability, and for a lot of this to, basically home in on a set of circumstances where it's fairer and these companies are doing right by the public and their customers.
That is so important. So you're saying, as you're saying this, I'm thinking back to some of these other cases that have been litigated or resolved and recently, in particular with big tech companies, in particular, like the big cases that happen with social media companies. And I just feel like that's so connected, or it's very similar. It's amazing to me that there is not the opportunity for, essentially, so if something happened to my children, and actually through this whole case that happened, right, through this data breach that happened, so I would not be able to sue or any of these companies under COPPA. Is that the case? And I would just do it essentially in the civil
Correct.
land. Okay. All right.
So you couldn't bring a COPPA claim, but you could bring an invasion of privacy claim.
Okay. So that, and it sounds like that's something, though, that one lever that we could try to pull to with our legislators to try to get them to pass something, or add it into COPPA and other laws to be able to actually raise up a claim. That's really an interesting point. What are your thoughts on, with everything that's been happening with these data breaches, with this incredible atrocity that is social media and what it is doing to our children, with the increase of AI and the invasion and mining of data of everybody? What do you think is the likelihood of something like that happening? Because we do, on the other hand, have these companies lobbying against it.
Right. So in terms of getting better legislation passed, I think it's the most important thing that Congress, or one of the most important things Congress can be focused on. This is something that has really strong bipartisan support, and if you look outside of industry funding, most people don't like this. Most people don't like being this exposed to danger through their computers, or having their kids exposed to danger at all times. It's just crazy to me that Congress hasn't seen fit to pass a comprehensive data privacy bill that would apply to everybody, social media and AI alike. There is COSA that is meant to keep kids safer online and then potentially impose some age restrictions. I think all of that's great, but I think what's even better would be kind of more affirmative design standards that companies would have to meet. And so I compare a lot of our technological era now to the automobile industry, 90 years ago. Once upon a time, they were like, look how great these cars are. This is great. The streets aren't full of horse manure and anybody can go anywhere. And truly, the Great American Road Trip, and you've got Route 66, and you've got all of these things that really make America America. We can go and live further away from town, and you can drive in, commute to your job, all these things. But they were really, really dangerous, and people were dying in horrific ways. And what the industry said forever was, well, this is just a cost doing business. We can't make cars safer. But we are unlocking all of this potential, all of these great opportunities for people. Well, then it came to find out, thanks to lawyers suing them, that no, they knew all kinds of ways to make cars safer. They just didn't want to. It was easier to pay off the family of somebody who died than it was to retool and reconfigure. And so once all of these internal documents came out over the course of lawsuits, companies realized that they're really, really exposed. And so where they had once resisted design standards and regulation, they now embraced it because it was predictable. And so you had, after basically a decade of lawsuits, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration came on board in I think 1970. And now you have car companies that are competing to be the safest, where they go and they advertise their crash test ratings. And you show, the crash test dummy videos and all of this stuff. And so you go from a world where look how great these things are, they can never be made safe, to a world where no, we're going to keep your family the safest. No, we're going to keep your family the safest. And they're really fighting over each other to say how great, how safe, how good their product can be. And so that is the future that I hope for with social media and AI. Like if we need it, that's what it should be. Right? It really should be. They should be competing to say, what's going to help people actually flourish and actually thrive. And a world where they're incentivized only to suck up information about people and use it against them later forever is never going to be a world where those incentives are aligned and where they're actually trying to do right by the human being that's sitting in front of the computer.
Yeah, I've heard you mention that idea elsewhere, and it really made me pause and think about what would that look like to have social media platforms advertising or touting their safety, the safeness of their platform for protecting families and children. And I got to be honest, it was a bit of a struggle based on some of the other things that we've talked about, in particular the attention economy and how
Yeah.
that's the big thing that they're looking to make their money, including on EdTech. Like when we look at distraction, but they look at it, just a distracted minute, but they look at it as dollar signs. And so it's really hard to see big tech ever truly considering it. But I'm willing to hope. I'm willing to hold out hope. So let's talk a little bit more about AI, because you touched on that as well. And we didn't get a chance to really talk about this last time we met, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on AI in education, in particular in your area. Where do you see there being dangers, and beyond necessarily just, although feel free to talk about this if you want to, beyond just the general concerns that I think that so many parents have as far as the loss of critical thinking skills, cheating, which, let's be real, happens everywhere, inappropriate content being returned by chatbots through completely innocent prompts by kids, or prompts that, let's be real, a developing child is not necessarily going to be able to be the most specific in their prompt, so it could be misinterpreted. So what other concerns do you see?
Well, that's a great list. That's a great list to start. Those are hugely concerning things. But essentially, I think that the idea of AI, certainly in the K-12 environment, just ever being pervasive, that undermines the whole idea of education. I think that education is something that happens. It happens person to person. It happens in a community. It happens, in a classroom. It really does happen together. And so when you inject this thing into that environment, you're undermining education. And basically, I want well-trained teachers who are equipped to care for my kids to be the first person my kid goes to ask for a question, right? That's the type of trust and relationships we're trying to build and foster. That is, I think, the seedbed of our democracy and community. Is we're there, we're learning how to live with one another, and who to trust, how to trust them, how to live in the world, all at school. And when we have this thing that we pretend is this oracle, and it undermines this human connection, I think is really, really profoundly scary. And not from just a ignorant fear of this. It's like, I know a lot about AI, and I think the way that it's set up is really bad and harmful. We know that AI chatbots are, like everything else, designed for engagement, right? Designed to maximize user time on device, user interaction with the chatbot. That's how they measure success. Well, that's really not appropriate for the classroom. We really shouldn't be measuring success, or have someone else be able to inject themselves into this captive environment and essentially redirect kids' attention toward the AI chatbot, right? That's really profoundly problematic. And when you're using these tricks to keep kids on the chatbot, as opposed to having them, if they're going to have to use it, get in and get out with the information that they need very quickly, well, then you're really designing in a hostile way against their best interests. And you to the point of cognitive offloading and just missing out on skill development and cheating. it's normalizing this stuff, and it's really making this thing that's available, and it's too tempting to pass up. And I think creating an environment where you're setting people up for success. If you've ever wanted to cut back on drinking or lose weight, it's much easier to have an environment where you don't buy the beer and it's not stocked in the fridge. You don't keep all the little treats on your pantry shelf. You make that decision once and then live throughout the week in an environment where you set yourself up for success. Well, the school environment where you have this temptation just right there at all times. Why are we asking kids to do this, to resist temptation at all times? And then now we see a lot of companies are already starting to question their commitment to AI, because I think people don't understand how expensive AI actually is. It's really deeply subsidized by venture capital, and it seems like some of those subsidies are starting to go away. And so imagine if we're in this world where you kind of use the drug dealer model. This is the free taste, right? And it is free, and you're there, and we're getting everybody addicted to it and habituated to it, and then suddenly you're going to have to pay. And our schools really going to be set up to pay for this and pay the full freight for this when companies like Uber can't afford to do it. When the Uber CFO, I think this week, said that they used their entire year's budget for AI in the first 4 months. And so so these things aren't actually any cheaper or more efficient than anything else. And so I think the theme of EdTech that I've seen in my work is it's a really great marketing pitch. It's pitched at solving actual problems that exist, but it winds up ultimately, if depending on where you draw your boundaries, being much more time consuming and much more expensive than just doing these more fundamental things, like in this case, have more librarians, have more teachers, pay them better, invest in your human capital, because all of this other stuff, it's so expensive. And again, let's put the shoe on the other foot. If it was teachers, right? And if there was somebody who could just say, well, next year your teacher salary is going to be double or triple, that your labor costs in school are subject to being doubled or tripled or quadrupled, like your AI costs might be. Well, we wouldn't accept that. We couldn't plan for that, right? And so I think it's so unpredictable and so fundamentally exploitative that it belongs nowhere near schools for now. We can all, when it gets good, we can always adopt it when it's good, but we don't need to let our kids be guinea pigs in this environment whatsoever.
I don't think I've actually really heard the argument about the cost, but that's such a great point, because it really is kind of overlooked, I think, because so many people do use just the free model. So everyone thinks it's just free. It's not free. It's taking something from you. If it's free, we're always told then the data or you are probably what is being sold. So I'm curious to get your perspective on how to respond to the argument that if we don't do this, then our kids are going to fall behind. America's going to fall behind, especially against, like, China's generally considered the biggest threat. Sometimes Russia, but I think China is really the one that is the leading threat as far as competition in the world. And we know from years ago that I know there's a very dystopian video about China having like these little headbands that they put on children to monitor their attention. Although I think that you might have been one of the ones who had told me about it, that there's also cameras they're using the cameras in our computers in the Chromebooks for schools to be monitoring children's response and their attention and all of that. So in any case, so there's this argument that if we don't do this now, our kids are not going to be able to use the technology. America in general is going to fall behind, and then we've got a communist dictatorship that is going to be running or taking over the world. So how do you respond to that?
I think, just with a lot of questions about, like, what do you mean falling behind? What do you mean, prepare for the future? What do you mean use AI? And I think just really getting down and getting specific about all of this, right? Because I think what we need is a resilient citizenry that knows how to do things themselves. And if you know how to think for yourself, if you know how to work with other people, if you know what reliable information looks like and what it doesn't, if you know how to build community, how to work together, which authority figures to trust, which authority figures to push back on, then you'll be fine with AI in the future. You'll figure it out. I think there's a lot of harm has been done by waving this banner of, oh, but the future. I think it's well intended at best, and I think really, really cynical marketing stuff at worst, where I'm just not persuaded, because it's not an argument, it's an assertion. And the same people who are saying, oh, we got to prepare them for the future, AI, it's like, well, what investment are you making in teaching kids to type, for example? What investment are you making in teaching kids how to just use ergonomically correct computer setup so they're not hurting their bodies as they sit in front of a computer? If we want to prepare them for the future, then let's equip them with skills and information about how this works. What are you doing to help yourself understand how do large language models work? When we say AI, what do we mean? Because it's this blanket marketing term, it always has been, of it's not real. It doesn't refer to anything fixed. There are different, that term is so expansive, it covers a lot of things. And so what do we mean when we say AI? And then how does that AI work? Is it one of these neural networks? Is it more symbolic AI? Is it large language model? And there are different. I'm not an AI expert. I've read some books, but all that to say, there's a lot of different ways that all of this stuff can be put together. Some of it is better, some of it is worse, but none of it is. We don't need to be doing Sam Altman's job for them. We don't need to be just spreading the gospel of AI and worried about the future. When I'd say, let's worry about today. Let's worry about the present. Let's think about, what do our kids' classrooms look like today? What skills are we developing for them today? How are they being put in harm's way today by the products that we have today? And then when this is ready for prime time, when it is so great, then there's time. There's time. We should be in no hurry to unleash any of this stuff on our school kids, or even our teachers or our faculty, until it's ready to go, until we know exactly what it costs in terms of money and in terms of what's being taken from people without their consent to train these models, what's happening to the environment. There's just all of these costs that we should be well aware of before we can actually do the real cost benefit analysis of, do we even want to use this in the first place?
I love that. I think it's a great response. I think this is too much. It reminds me actually of the last argument or the whole argument the debate topic of the idea of did EdTech deliver on its promises. And that was part of what was presented all the time, is that, well, we're going to see it in the future. Like it's coming, but it's been decades with no actual learning improvement, and only only problems and regression. So it's definitely not, how long do you wait for something to, and this is just another technology thing as well, not to mention all of those skills, those are the underlying fundamental pieces. And you blew my mind the last time we met, because you told me that, and I genuinely did not realize that we aren't actually teaching the skills such as how to be healthy at a computer. Which I don't know, maybe I guess since we were older when it really rolled into our lives, I don't know. That just shocked me that was not something that was ever being addressed in schools. And because I think you said there's actually been genuine issues of kids like falling out of their desks because of not taking care of themselves.
We certainly hear about kids with like neck pain and eye strain. Myopia has gone up quite a bit. Wrist pain. Kids get headaches. And you think about, you're just hunched over this machine that wasn't meant, in a desk that wasn't meant for it. And so you're just having to contort your body in all these ways that are unhealthy, that are really bad for you.
Yeah. So what advice could you give to parents in particular with all this data, if they're trying to push back on AI, if they're trying to protect their children, especially because some schools I have seen, I think it was in New Jersey, that said that parents were not allowed to opt out of technology because it was just too embedded. I could be not claiming the right state, but what advice do you have to parents who are facing that, where they try but they're running into walls?
Right. So this is happening all over the country. I work with community groups truly coast to coast, from Seattle to Los Angeles to Denver and Kansas and Pennsylvania, the DC area, Maine, Vermont. It's happening everywhere. And I think the first thing to understand is, don't take this fight on yourself. don't take this fight on yourself. Start building community, asking questions in your community, and understanding, these are my concerns. This is how it's affecting my family. How do you feel about this? And you'll be, I would be surprised if you didn't start finding like-minded people to work with, and then to take these concerns to your school district together with solutions. And there's so much evidence and information out there now that this is just bad for kids. Like, it's not. I probably said this last time we talked, but it would be one thing if EdTech was steroids, right? If we had all of this negative stuff, but look how good performance was. Kids' privacy is in jeopardy. Their necks and heads might hurt. They might not have the social skills they used to, but gosh, look at their academic performance. We don't even have that, right? We don't even have that. We've erased 50 years of gains in this country, in addition to exposing kids to all of these harms and risks of harm. And so, your school probably won't be ready to hear it, but it doesn't mean you don't start saying it. And I think just continuing to show up to school board meetings, digging into your policies, and thinking about, well, what would a positive vision of change look like? What are we okay with? What are we not okay with? And keep trying to engage in dialogue and help these schools understand, the school leadership understand that, the future looks like a lot less tech. It is. It does. If we've seen the social media cases, we're bringing a bunch of cases against EdTech companies as well. I feel very good about our chances. The world is going to look different. This stuff's going to be more expensive. It's not going to do the stuff that the companies say that it does. And it's really brittle too. I think about, just a good thought experiment would be to the schools who say, well, this is just too embedded. We can't take it out. Well, imagine a cyber attack, right? Imagine something where, for whatever reason, Google servers are offline for 9 months, whatever. I'm not saying it's possible or it's likely, but just imagine that happened. That we couldn't do it. We couldn't log in. We couldn't log into Instructure like we did at the end of this school year with the Canvas breach. What would we do? Would we cancel school? And if the answer is no, we wouldn't, then what would we do? How would we deal with that? How would we deal with that point of failure? What are the things that are available to us? And then with that thought experiment, why are we waiting? Why do we have this system that is so brittle and fragile and subject to this single point of failure? Why aren't we building a more robust system now? And I think, if anything good were to come out of this Canvas hack, it would be, I'm hoping school leaders can start thinking about this much more concretely, that these harms aren't, put aside all the data harms that we talked about and everything else. Access to education itself literally is contingent on this one platform. And the only reason that kids were able to finish out school was because the hackers relented. There was no reason for them to have to do that, right? They could have just frozen everybody out forever. They could have jacked up the ransom much higher than even what it was. So I'm sure it was significant. And so I'm hoping that school leaders can start taking these issues much more seriously and thinking about them not just as the fringe concerns of a bunch of parents who spend too much time on the internet, but much more of, this is fundamentally jeopardizing our ability to do the thing we're here to do, which is to educate kids. And how do we change? And anybody who says, oh, it's just too embedded, asbestos was literally embedded in nearly every building in America. And we found a way out of it because it was bad. It was bad for people. It was bad for kids. It was bad to have that in the school environment. And so, if we can physically get asbestos out, I'm pretty sure something where the contract renewal cycle is about every 3 years would be quite a bit easier to extricate ourselves from.
That is a great point. That is absolutely fantastic. And by the way, your thought experiment, the concept of, Google, these platforms being offline for 9 months. We've seen that happen, not for 9 months, but we saw AWS go down. We've seen numerous other times where the web servers go down and the world is in a panic because of that. And it really shouldn't be that way. It is a little concerning that you see so much panic because we are so reliant on this. But I think that's a really important point that schools need to have as a fail-safe. One of the things that I'd like to finish, I know we're getting close to time, so I'd just like to wrap up by talking, if it's okay, about one of the programs I think you're involved in or on support heavily is Fair Play, right? You're a part of that?
Yeah.
And I think I saw something from your friend Emily Churkin looking at and promoting a pause on generative AI, right? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, yes. So Fair Play is this great grassroots nationwide movement. They've been around for 25 years or more, and they are nonpartisan, transpartisan. So I got friends from all across the political spectrum involved in Fair Play. I love it. They're the best. Um, and so they advocate for keeping commercialism out of children's lives. That was their initial brief when they got started. And what once was sugar cereal and cartoons based on toys is now you know AI that tells kids to kill themselves, right? Like it's really, really changed. And so they've risen to the occasion and released this great statement calling for a pause on AI, or as got this great law professor friend in New York, Guy Bernstein, a recall of AI, right?
Mm.
Basically, this product is not safe for the environment. And so Fair Play released this statement calling for a pause on AI in school. And, a lot of what I said echoes their statement of, this just is not ready for prime time and it shouldn't be rushed. And we're talking about, very vulnerable young people who shouldn't be exposed to these harms. And so would highly recommend anybody check out their letter. Maybe you can post it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But they're just an excellent, excellent organization that I would encourage everybody to support.
Well, thanks. I thought that was so interesting, and I was pretty sure you'd mentioned it last time, which is why I wanted to give it a little highlight. But all
Yeah.
right, is there anything, any other points that parents might not think about this being important to them to be worried about as far as parental rights and the data collection and anything we didn't get to touch on?
I think we really covered it. I think, I would say watch this space. We're going to have some exciting things coming out over the coming months. And would love to come back and talk here when the time is right about some of our new efforts that are going to be, I think, pretty profound and effective and really, cause some lasting change. So I would love to talk to you here in a few months. And then for parents who are struggling, those harms and the struggles that families have can look like a lot of things. It can look like your child getting connected to a predator online. It can look like your child developing an unhealthy relationship with a chatbot that you never would have introduced him or her to, but they were able to get to through their school computer. Um, it can look like your child going to school and sitting on YouTube all day long and looking at YouTube for 6 hours a day instead of doing their lessons. In many cases, the schools will blame kids and blame parents. I just want everybody listening, especially all the moms listening, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your kid's fault. You're not a bad parent. They're not a bad kid. The products that they're made to use at school, they're not designed to keep kids safe or help them learn. They're not designed to help you as a parent control what's in their environment the same way that you control your home environment about, where is the TV? When is it on? What devices do my kids have? Do they have access to the internet? All of the things that you do to keep your home environment safe. Well, there's no tools are given to you to keep your kids, information environment safe at school. And so these are all design choices, and they're design choices that are made to benefit companies and, that wind up harming children. And so if any of that resonates with anybody, reach out to us. We're here to help. We're a contingency fee firm, and so there's no charge to talk to us. And we do want to help everybody who needs it. And so if you've been waiting for permission or whatever, someone to say, reach out, this is the nudge, go ahead and do it. And we'd be happy to help.
And where can they find you again? And I'll make sure we link in the show notes too.
So we're edtech.law. That's edtech.law. And there's a little contact us button at the top of the page. And so click that. Our people will be in touch. We'll schedule a conversation. It's been, and we began, I think we should end on this great hopeful note that 2026 has really been a watershed. You and I last spoke about 6 months ago when I was in DC. And, I feel like the whole world has changed for the better since then. These issues that were once a little more marginalized and, have just burst into the mainstream. We're getting a lot of legislators listening to us. And, again, the thing that I really like about this movement is it really is an opportunity to civically engage with one another because this is not something, there is no red blue divide here. This is something that a lot of people are all on the same page for the same reasons. And I just like that hopeful democratic, lowercase democratic spirit of working together to protect something that I would hope we can all agree needs protecting, which is our kids.
Yeah, it goes back to I guess it feels like classic American, where you could agree to disagree. It was okay that we didn't have to agree on every single issue. At the core, on an issue like protecting children, we are able to agree. And that I really appreciate that hope, because I know when I was first researching all of this, it was hard for me to realize how deliberate the design was, how intentional it was, how much we had been lied to as parents. And I struggled severely with shame, with regret, because I thought I had done a good job of protecting my kids, and I think I did better than probably a lot of parents, because like I was one of those parents that was made fun of because I had protection apps and stuff on their phones and whatever. But just the fact that I even gave them a phone, I'm like, oh, I wish I hadn't. And so anyway, I appreciate your positive ending on hope, because it is easy to get down on yourself as a parent, but there is hope.
There's hope, and just know it's not your fault. You're lied to. If you're not fully informed, you can't make a good decision. And I
Yeah.
think that's a huge problem that we have. And so, I would just encourage people to try and get past that shame, get past that concern. Don't get down on yourself, because I know we're all, as parents, doing the best we can with what we have. We do want our kids prepared for the future. For a decade and a half, we've been told this is the way to do it, and it just isn't. It just isn't. It's a very cynical marketing pitch. And it really comes at the cost of kids and families and relationships. And so, but there's always a new day, and time to make a change. And so, it's okay.
Yep, I agree. Well, thank you so much. We always appreciate having you on the show. So I am excited to hear in a couple months. I will be waiting with anticipation to be able to bring you back on, because any sort of good news in this space, I think, is absolutely impactful on all of society. So I look forward to it.
Well, thanks, Missy. I always love talking to you too. Thank you.
Unsurprisingly, yet another fantastic, insightful, and encouraging conversation with Andy Liddell. If you take anything from this episode, please remember the system is not built to protect children first. It's built to collect, scale, and profit. And parents are expected to trust that everything will somehow work itself out. And he made the point clearly in talking about the data breach risks, the weak privacy protection, the lack of real accountability, and the way schools have become so dependent on tech that even basic education could theoretically be held hostage by a single platform failure. Oh, wait, it was. That's the part parents need to remember when the structure itself is fragile. The people inside it are the ones who pay the price. But he didn't leave parents in despair, and neither will we. His encouragement is simple and powerful. You were lied to. And if you weren't truly informed, you could not have made the best decision. That is not a reason for shame. It's a reason to wake up, speak up, and move forward with clear eyes. So keep asking hard questions, keep pushing for better protections, and keep showing up for your kids, because the truth is still the most useful thing parents have. So, what did you think? Leave us a comment and let us know what you think about this episode, what your feelings are, what your thoughts are on technology. How much technology do you think that schools should actually be using? What are your thoughts about AI in education? Drop us a comment and let us know. And if you like this episode, please hit like and subscribe, and then share it with a friend, a parent, a grandparent, and help us build more engaged citizens and not enraged activists. Because as James Madison said, the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty. And that's why we do what we do. Class dismissed.